Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
Hey everybody, just wanted to jump in before the start of today's show and tell you about some learning and development events that I think you might be really interested in. I know I'm certainly very excited. At the beginning of the year, in the new year, with John O'Sullivan and Mark Bennett, we will be getting together to discuss the future of coaching with the help of Juan Gonzalez Mendia from Sudamerica Coaching, who is putting on the event, and I'm sure it's going to be really stimulating. I'm so excited about getting together with John. We haven't seen each other for ages, so it's going to be really good. And I equally haven't spent very much time with Mark as my mentor, so every time I speak with him, I know I always come away with enormous amount of learning, various things that I need to refine, tweak, and improve on. And then later in the year, at the end of March, I've been working with the fantastic staff at Stuart Melville's College in Edinburgh. So I'll be going north of the border to do the very first Talent Equation live. It's going to be an experimenting conversation, and I've got some other friends of the show joining me on that day as well, where I've got Danny Newcomb, Russell Earnshaw, John Fletcher, the Magic Academy boys, and we're getting together as well for some conversations, and Mark will be coming as well. Mark Bennett will be coming up for that one to discuss some of his principles as well. Really excited about those couple of days, and I highly recommend getting on board if you can. I'll look forward to seeing you and learning together. All the details are available on the events page of my website, so if you want to book on, go there and you'll get all the links that you need. In the meantime, on with today's show.
Well, I'm really excited to welcome Richard Shorter from Non-perfectdad to the podcast. Richard, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a real privilege to be here, and it's a bit weird hearing your voice at normal speed because I normally listen to you on the rowing machine at 1.5 times speed, so to keep me going. And so it's good to speak to you in a normal kind of pace.
I talk fast enough as it is, so I can't imagine what it must be like on 1.5 speed. It must almost be ineligible.
I must admit, when you were on with that legend Craig Gunny from Australia, I did have to go back down to normal speed because it was just, he is such a brilliant guy, but he was so excited I just couldn't quite pick it up at 1.5 speed.
Yeah, I totally can understand that entirely. We were on a roll. So anyway, Richard, tell me the story. Non-perfectdad. How did it come about? Take me through the journey.
Brilliant, thank you. So sport played as it does in lots of teenagers' lives, played a big part of my life, particularly around sixth form time. I'm quite dyslexic and think I found a real release, a real freedom from trying to read and write on the sports pitch. Got into some hockey coaching. Really enjoyed that. At the same time, I was kind of really active in my local church, so I kind of had those two parts of my life going. I did a degree in community and youth studies, and then landed up working for a Baptist church in Southend-on-Sea. So that was very, very busy. So I played a bit of hockey, but stopped coaching. And through that process, I've become a Baptist minister. So I'm still a Baptist minister part-time in Russell Earnshaw calls it deepest, darkest Essex. I'm not sure that's totally fair to where I am, but I'm in Romford in East London. And throughout that time of working in church, doing youth work, supporting parents and engaging parents at the beginning of that journey wasn't on my radar at all. I was a young 22-year-old with this kind of quite naive and arrogant view I was going to change the world, and we started a skate park, and I learned to inline skate on the skate park as a result. And I started to notice this pattern that we would do some great kind of award-winning, whatever that meant, youth work with these young people, and then they would go home. And it only took a couple of years to notice that the home environment was having a significant impact on the outcomes for these young people, in both positive and negative. And that I, as a youth worker, had, a lot like a number of the coaches who will listen, had this incredible privilege to spend this time with these young people, but notice the immense significance of the influence at home over their outlook, over their mindset, over their ability to embrace the challenge, and kind of thrive. And so from that point, I started to try and take a more holistic approach and include parents in that. And then when we came here to Romford, we worked very heavily with the local authority and local schools, primarily me delivering parenting courses at the kind of sharp and ugly end of safeguarding. Because I'm a man, there aren't many males in that kind of sector. So I was used primarily for dad one-to-one kind of support in serious cases and running dads only parenting courses. And that was an incredible privilege. The community that I'm part of, the church community I'm part of, can't afford me full time. So a few years ago when we were looking at options, I thought, again, very naively, I'll start a business. I've never done that before. Business people make that look so easy. So I wanted to start a parenting, coaching, consultancy work, and fell into the sports world, which is brilliant for me because I love sport. I'd been kind of away from it for a while, and I think the sports world enjoy the fact that I'm a parent, I sound like a parent, I talk like a parent, but then hopefully I bring that evidence-based interpretation of sports parenting into the mix to support parents. Particularly, I've landed up in kind of pathway areas, so delivering at national level for several under-18 sides and England Rugby Premiership sides, and some of the more sportier independent prep schools and independent schools in the country. And it's I've loved it. I've loved every moment of it. It's a ridiculous privilege, but I recognize that parental engagement is a challenge. But I also recognize in sport that parental engagement has a massive opportunity. You know, in the last year, I reckon I've spoken to over 4,000 parents in meetings, which is phenomenal. If you talk to maths departments or science departments or foreign language departments, and there's nothing, you know, all those are brilliant and have their place, how many parents they would get on a Saturday afternoon before school pickup at an independent school, or I doubt the numbers would be comparative. So I get really excited about the opportunities sports institutions have to engage with parents. Sport institutions do have power, and it's a great opportunity to use that power well to resource families. Some, I know you had Gordon on, and as he points out, some keep it at a very arm's length. And kind of, I think that's an abuse of that power. Others just see parents, as I saw my own parents at 18s, as a cash cow, a taxi service, and what do they know? Whereas others, I think, very excitingly starting to realise that if they want to see their team's culture embedded in their athlete's mindset, and I would talk to parents about character rather than mindset because I think it's an easier to understand word, but they've got to support and resource the parents to be able to embody that mindset and character at home. There's no point in telling kids, you know, results don't matter for the next month, we're just working on this, if mum and dad are asking every time, what'd you get in your English test, what'd you get in your science test, what'd you get in your German test, because that is still giving that message that I've got to succeed, I've got to have a measurable success at this point, etc., etc.
Wow, so much in there. I mean, one of the things I love as a starting point is the very fact you called it non-perfect dad, because as listeners to this podcast will know, I think in if you talk about target audience, I'm your man, because the very idea of non-perfect is almost kind of very aligned, actually, I think, to a lot of what we talk about here on the podcast, which is, you know, there isn't really a perfect ideal. I think a lot of us put ourselves under undue pressure in attempting to be a perfect dad or a perfect parent. I don't think there is one. A perfect coach. I don't think there is one. If as many of the people on the show, and I'm the same, are also in the situation of being parent and coach to our kids, there's even more dynamics there that need to be addressed. But at the same time, there's also this idea of, we're going to get things wrong, and actually that's all right, because this isn't the easiest thing in the world, and they're going to throw things at us left, right, and centre. But actually, together, collectively, through ongoing conversations and being more prepared to share some of our indiscretions or failures, let's say, we can all do it a little bit better. And I think that's perfect for me, because the view of the world of perfection or ideal means that people don't tell everybody else what they did wrong. People don't tell each other their latest failures, which is why after Gordon's, I'm hoping not to do that with this podcast, by the way, but after the one I did with Gordon, I had the conversation with Evan afterwards, because on that very day I made a fairly significant faux pas, and I wanted to share that with other people, because it's all very well sitting there, but I'm in the same boat as anybody else, and I think it's very important to share those sorts of journeys in an effort to help each other, at the very least, not to feel alone. And then secondly, to go, actually, do you know what? It's all right, and we can learn from each other. So I think is that sort of the underlying philosophy of what you were trying to do?
Well, yes. I think at very basic level, I was looking at what other parenting coaches, parenting gurus were kind of putting out there. And there was just lots of pretty pictures of them and their perfect families, and telling lots of stories how their children had got it right. And I just like, from my own value system, was like, I can't present something that I don't believe is true. And then as I started to I didn't use that label I just was Richard Shorter and then I used the non-perfect dad bit a bit in photos, and it connected so much with people. I was like, I felt nervous about being honest about that. And, here I am, I've got 20 years experience of working with parents. Shouldn't I give myself a slightly more positive name? And some people told me off for using it. But actually, and I thought, no, I'm not a perfect dad. And it's great, because when my own kids say to me, how can you be a parenting coach? You're a rubbish dad. I'm like, hang on, look at the name on the website, kids. I've not lied to anybody. So partly was that, and then in response to the sports world, I think it is a very intentional effort of being countercultural and maintaining that. In the feedback I get, often comes up, that was really encouraging, and I'm doing a good job, and today helped me realise that. And I think that's really sad that parents can get to an elite level of their child's support in sport, and only for the first time be told, I'm doing an all right job. I did a session the other day, and John Mallett from Millfield was in the audience, and because his child was in this pathway, and so he was in the coffee queue afterwards, and just heard a parent say, wow, we were told we were great today. I've never been told I'm great before. And I just think, like, that's a child representing their country in an under-18 team, and they haven't yet been told by their local club, by their kids' school, by the pathway that they're in, that they're doing a good job. I just think that's frightening, really. So I think, yes, I wanted to bring that kind of empathy and encouragement that we're not getting it right. And do you know what? I think the sports world does have a bit of a problem in scapegoating parents as a kind of the kind of negative of to the environments. We all like to find a scapegoat to blame for it. And I think when I look at what I would call some of the clickbait material out there about parents from so-called sporting experts or whatever, that puts parents in good and bad lists and things like that, I just think when I often see those, I'm often tempted to just respond with why all the listings on the bad could actually be a positive if done for the right reason, and why the things on the good can actually be a negative. Because I think kind of judging human beings because of the way they are on the sideline of the sports pitch is just really unfortunate, and that reduces parents' ability to communicate about it. You go on Amazon, look at the top books about parenting, you'll see the kind of technical ones are from when kids are 0 to 2. And then you'll see some specialist challenges around kind of autism, ADHD. But most of the books that sell really well on Amazon are things like the unmumsy mum, the gin and tonic mum. People want to hear stories of just normal parents expressing it normally. It's why things like Mumsnet are so successful. And yet the government can't engage parents in behavioural change stuff. But Mumsnet has this kind of big sisterhood thing going on, because I think you're right. It's removing that. We're telling you what to do. You're getting it terribly wrong, instead of we're a sisterhood who are just sharing our muck-ups and stumbles in a non-judgmental environment.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because I'm not quite sure. I like the fact you've used that term countercultural, because I do think that there's a phrase that I've used a couple of times on the podcast by a guy called Siddhartha Mukherjee, who was talking about how in order to counterculture you need counterculture, and I think I like the idea of a countercultural approach to this, which is to sort of just offer an alternative as opposed to say this is bad. Having said that, I'm just conscious that on Twitter, literally in the past few hours, I've been commenting on a parent's involvement in sport. There's that video doing the rounds. I think you were the one who put me on.
Yeah, I was, and I think I kind of put that out there slightly tongue in cheek. It's interesting how many people are calling for the poor dad's head, and I think for me, it symbolises, like, sport has such a special place in our culture. It does something really beautiful to us when it's at its best, and I think, I mean, I don't know that dad. I haven't seen that whole video. For those who haven't seen it, his son's, what we can assume is his son. We hope it's his son. Flipping heck, if it's not his son, it's really, really awful. But it is his son in goal. So he's standing by his son in goal. And part of me would want to say, well, there's some environmental stuff going on there, because why hasn't the coach just gently walked around and said to the dad, actually, I've got a job over here you can do? Or if they've known the dad really well, come on, mate, leave the poor kid alone. You know, you can say that. It's
supposed to be what the respect line's for.
Yeah. So
that's
just kind of
that.
Like the fact that dad is within touching distance, but then the striker hits, I think, quite a good shot from distance, and the poor goalie is clearly not going to get it, so the dad shoves the son over. So in some ways it's comical, in some ways it's absolutely appalling, all at the same time, isn't it?
It's like a Sabutio man falling, isn't it? Looks just like
Yeah, it's taking that whole joystick coaching thing to a whole new level, isn't it?
Oh, God, absolutely. Puppeteering coaching, yeah.
But for me, I want to be saying what's going on in that dad's head, right, in that moment. Now, this isn't to justify that behaviour, but what's going on is kind of an emotional response that runs faster than that part of the brain which has reason and rational behind it. And, I don't know. Are we allowed swearing on the podcast, Stuart?
I think we probably can get away with it on this one. I can always put the explicit on it, yeah.
We'll put the explicit on it. So one of my favourite films is Bad Boys 2.
Oh, yeah.
And the most viewed kind of scene of that on YouTube is the Reggie scene. So I'm just going to play the start. If you don't know it, this is the two main characters, a policeman and a 15-year-old boy has just come to take one of the policeman's daughter out on her first ever date. And this is the response as the dad opens the door.
What you doing here? Came to take out Megan. What? I came to take out Megan. How old are you? I'm 15, Miss Megan. Motherfucker, you look 30. Show me some ID. I don't have none on me. You don't have no idea. Get your ass up against that wall. What the fuck is your problem? You think you know it all? You little young Thundercats. You got joints on you. You smoke that shit?
Right, I'm going to stop that there because you can get a vibe and you can watch the rest on it. But
Martin Lawrence at his best.
Yeah, and it's very funny. But and as a church minister, I love using that clip because I can't kind of use it in church, but I can get away with it in parenting courses. So, but for me, that outlines that kind of emotional response. I know that's a comical thing, but I don't know about you, but on Facebook and social media, I see dads often talk about, daughter's first boyfriend's come around, and that kind of emotional response of love of I want to protect, I want to see succeed, I want to do well. And like that poor dad on the side of the football pitch, or that dad as the boyfriend opens the door, has got a ton of kind of understandable, protective, love-orientated emotions going on, but those emotions can kind of get skewed, which is why I think lecturing parents, having a go at parents, doesn't do anything, because I think it retreats the opportunity for a parent to kind of slow the brain down and reflect on the type of behaviour that actually is truly loving and releasing. So I use that video clip in parenting courses, and then we do some stuff around problem solving, because that dad clearly had a problem and he was nervous about his daughter's first date, and there's nothing wrong with having that problem, but that was probably a very deficit way to, if that happened in real life, a daughter is unlikely to ever trust the dad again. And so helping parents think through the kind of implications of some of their behavior, which I think are almost all, not always, but almost all, love motivated. And so I use in my sessions a lot of games, primarily because they're fun, but actually games kind of change narrative. I think when we're laughing, we're more open to reflecting on things slightly differently. I like to think I'm still quite poignant and kind of at times when the blunt stuff needs saying, it's said, but I share my own parent failings and try and encourage parents to reflect on the potential outcomes of the behaviours that we see that we, perhaps as coaches, struggle with in our environment. But at the same time, I would encourage coaches to think about how their environment either encourages those behaviours that we don't want to see or not. Because it's all very well saying to parents, sideline behaviour needs to be X, Y, Z, or conversations in the car need to be orientated around this. But if our environment is encouraging that hyper-competitive kind of joystick coaching, creating a lot of anxiety around what success and failure is, that will only perpetuate a parent's anxiety around those emotions anyway.
So I think I definitely want to circle back to the coaching piece, because I do think there's loads of applications of what you talk about in the coaching space, and I think there's a lot that us coaches can do. There's two elements to that, really. There's the coach-parent relationship, there's the athlete-parent relationship, there's the athlete-coach relationship, and you need to see them in a constant sort of triangular flow. And one of the reasons I think this is so important is because to think from a coaching standpoint that the parent is just a bystander who should just pretty much, they literally hand their precious cargo, precious thing over to somebody, and me as a coach go, I'll take it from here, thanks very much. I'm the all powerful, all knowledgeable coach, and now you're not to question my methods because I know what I'm doing over here. I just think firstly, those days are over. Secondly, the arrogance to consider that is an issue, and so that whole triangular relationship is really, really important. It's not coach to athlete, it's coach, parent, athlete together connecting in, because those coaches, those parents, they've got, like you say, you make the point of the emotional response born of love. They are emotionally connected to the experiences that their children are having, both positive and negative. And if you think that they're just, like you say, just going to stand by and passively observe that, well, it's an unrealistic expectation for a kickoff. Secondly, as a coach, I don't want that. You know what? I don't want parents not to be engaged. I actively want their engagement. I want them to be involved. I like to think I'm building really good relationships with parents. I've had kids with me on a journey now for quite some time, and I'm building active relationships with them. And some of those active relationships are really brilliant because you can have great conversations about them. One of my highlight moments, in actual fact, is often when I've got a parent with me and I'll go, "Did you see that?" And they go, "What?" I go, "Did you just see what he just tried to do or she just tried to do?" And they went, No, I didn't see that. And go, "Oh, look. And I'll describe it to them. And they weren't aware of what they did. What probably all they saw was either a failure or an outcome or a missed outcome, missed opportunity, this, that, and the other. But when you reframe it for them, did you see what they tried to do? That's really
and you know what happens is, because we parents love to be praised and encouraged, what then happens as a result of that is that, Stu was really proud of you today. He pointed out when you did this, and I thought that was really good too, even if parent missed it. That's the sort of thing, and a wise parent might get on the phone to granny and say that out loud so that child could kind of hear it in the background or whatever. Particularly, teenage boys, etc., sometimes aren't comfortable with getting loads of praise. I think that's something we need to work on with. I don't think we should just accept it. But there are different ways of parents repeating that conversation with you that reinforce that, so it helps parents get the message, but it also helps parents reinforce that to the athlete, because in a game a player might do 6 or 7 or 10 or 20, 30 of those things, but the one or two that you pointed out to parents will help inform the conversations later. I think that coaches are missing a trick often when they have their post-game huddle or whatever. I think you've talked on here a huge amount of times about what's the point of having a massive post-game dissection straight away afterwards because everyone's knackered. But I think if the parents are in earshot and you're just pointing out where players displayed what your coaching aims are, what you're trying to see within, so great problem solving, great sports personship, whatever it might be, if you use that post huddle just to kind of review that with your team and point out, instead of one player of the match, but try and point out, if you can, with everybody, that would be an amazing piece of coaching art to kind of go through the whole team. But even if you can't do that, to point out 7 or 8 players who caught your eye and make sure it's a different 7 or 8 the following week. And there's a job for a parent to say to a parent, listen, I want to make sure I include everybody. Can you write down the names of the people I praise this week so that next week I can make sure I praise a different set of people? That informs the parent conversation at home. Whereas often, my son plays rugby and I'll walk around the pitches before and after with the dog while they're warming up, and you'll see smaller games ending or bigger games warming up, and you listen to some of the post-game talks and I'm just like, really, what is going on here? I don't understand. I can understand it's the coach's frustration coming out into talking to kids, but that's really sad, and it misses the opportunity to start to own that conversation at home, to help kids get a better conversation at home.
There's my son's football coach is brilliant at this. It's made me think, actually. It's not something I do well enough, and I could do doing that a little bit better, but he's very good at that. He emails everybody. He emails the parents, and he gives a little bit of a match report, and then there's a player of the match that he's assessed and all these sorts of things. But he reinforces this value principle that they've got. Brilliant. And all those sorts of things. And I think it's a really nice. I get that email, and it's quite nice to read, and you just see who's done well and who's done well.
And how quickly do you open that email compared to others?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just not nice to get. It's one of those really nice things. And it doesn't take too long, and it's not that difficult. But actually, the fact that he does that's quite a powerful thing.
My challenge to coaches, if coaches could learn one thing off me, would be every time a parent comes up to you, engage in a parent conversation, just interrupt the conversation at the appropriate moment. Say, listen, I really want to talk about that, but before we do, I just need to say, Evan this week did this, and that was just brilliant how he embodied our character traits, or we've been talking about this a lot and he worked really hard at it, or do you know what, he got stuck on something all week, but he's come back. He didn't nail it, but he's come back with a smile on his face, and I think I'm just really chuffed that he's, if coaches started every conversation with a parent with a positive, and I recognise that some parents can be really out of order and unhelpful, and I recognise that there are some around selection and things like that parents can be particularly unhelpful, but I think if you build that kind of safe, uncertain thing that I know Dr. Susanna Brown talked to you about, I think a lot of environments are working on that with athletes, but how do we work on that with parents? And for me, I think that parents want to hear that their kid is valued and loved in this environment to start off with, even if the outcomes of that don't mean first team selection all the time, and helping stretch parents' thinking, helping them feel a little bit uncertain, because hang on, here's this coach and my kid's having a great time, whether that be in an elite performance pathway or in a grassroots club. They're not selected every week, but the coach clearly values them, clearly finds benefit in them being around. My child really relates really well to them. This is an environment my child is thriving in. So how are my success outcomes need to be reframed a little bit? And now that's not a conversation that goes on easily, which is why I think coaches using people like myself to come in and have that conversation is very, very helpful. I think there's another challenge in coach education as well, is that I've spent 20 years, Stuart, learning how to talk to parents, and a huge chunk of that has been dealing with very, very difficult parents. I would be surprised if there are many awkward conversations with parents that I haven't had. I know that sounds a bit arrogant, but that's from a very broad, sharp, ugly end. And I think that there can be some really good coach education on some of the really easy stuff to do with parents, but also I think we need to give coaches permissions to not have to be complete and utter experts in standing up in front and talking to parents. We allow people to specialise in certain areas. I think national governing bodies could do well to have people who are good at coming down and talking to parents, because I think to expect a coach to kind of have my level of experience and ability to resist that, I think a lot more could be done in coach education for coaches on dealing with and interacting with parents. But I think there needs to be a balance struck between we wouldn't expect coaches to become physiotherapists or to become nutritionists. So I think we need to equip them with a decent skill set particularly around parental interactions around the pitch, et cetera. Like your son's football coach is a fantastic example of that. The examples we've talked about, and then also recognise that it's taken me 20 years. And someone called me a parent expert the other day, and I told them off. I was like, I'm not really comfortable with that phrase. I think that's because parenting is so broad and complex. I'm not comfortable with that title at all. So for me, there is about looking for a tapestry of interaction with parents from national governing bodies, from teams, etc., that enables parents to get an enriched experience and enables coaches to not feel like here's another skill set. Because, if you're passionate about coaching under sevens cricket, you might not actually have the skill set to stand up in front of 30 parents and lead a parents meeting. Or now you could learn that, you could learn parts of that to do it basically, but let's resource coaches to do the bits where they're most likely to have pain points and be most impactful with parents, and let's encourage the kind of wider bodies and organisations to use people who know how to connect with parents well, really, which I know sounds a little bit of a plug for my own work, but it's something that I believe in. I also think that having a multi-voiced, particularly in the academy kind of talent development pathways that I've been into, the academy managers, etc., hold a huge amount of power over parents, because parents, I think part of the reason parents turn up is because they fear it's going to affect selection in some shape or form. So by having a more neutral voice to be able to come in and talk to parents and to draw parents into conversation, I think is a very, very important thing. And again, I don't think we should necessarily expect coaches to be experts in doing that.
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. I'll pick up on that academy one. I'll just circle back to that in a minute. But I think there's something you alluded to earlier, which I think is really important, is now I think about it, there's not a single, I can't think of a single coach education offer that has parental engagement or parental connectivity as part of it. It's all about the sports skills. It's all about the techniques, the tactics, all those sorts of things. I haven't even seen any CPD offer that's actually wrapped into, coach education, coach qualification that looks into, engagement with parents and techniques and approaches and all those sorts of things. And yet, when you think about it, it's probably the one thing that pretty much every coach, if they're working with children, is likely to find that they need to engage with. So
totally.
Fascinating, isn't it?
It is. And when institutions book me for a parents session, I'm so passionate about equipping coaches and also seeing my messages carried on throughout the season, because a parents meeting with me, okay, I get great feedback and I get great encouragement. That's good for me. But a one-off meeting or a one-off resource in anything is never going to complete the circle. What is required is those people who have the relationships to keep bumping on that agenda week in, week out. And so when I go into a school or a sports club, I offer a coach's CPD as part of the package. I'm like, look, you booked me to do a parents meeting, but look, for free, I'm not even going to charge you extra because I'll do a 45-minute coach's CPD on how to kind of carry these messages forward and how to engage with parents. And I get, I don't know whether I need to get a bit more hard-nosed and say if people don't want the CPD on how to work with parents, I won't deliver the parents meeting. I don't know. But there are a number of institutions like, brilliant, we've never had anything on that. That's really exciting. But others are like, oh no, I don't think we need it. And I'm like, okay, that worries me if you think you don't need it. So it really excites me when I get an opportunity to work with a bunch of teachers or coaches before the parents meeting.
You know what? It's a good point you make, right? Because I've worked for a number of governing bodies, and I know particularly, I've spoken to a couple of performance directors in my time, but certainly one sticks out in my mind where it was the parents were the problem. It was nothing to do with us. Yeah. Oh, we're all just trying to do the best job, and we're going to try and get, we've got to get a team out and we've got to try and win things and we've got to try and get parents were the problem. It's like, they're the challenge. We need to keep them as far away from us as possible so that we can get on with the job, and I remember at the time thinking that can't be the way to do this. And then I've subsequently heard, I've been involved in, I was delivering a follow-up workshop to a group of coaches directly after a session with parents. It's like a regional camp. And there was 2 governing body representatives standing in front of this group of parents. It was pretty, I walked in because my session was happening afterwards. So I walked in sort of with the last 15 minutes to go or so. And the atmosphere was pretty, you could feel it was pretty edgy, clearly some difficult messages being sent out. I think there was some changes happening to the pathway and all those sorts of things. So there was quite a lot of disgruntled parents anyway. And again, probably down to the fact that they hadn't been communicated with particularly well. And the response from the people in the front of the room was that I'll remember this quote, which was, we're trying to provide a high performance program for your children. What we need you to be is high performance parents. And I just thought, whoa.
Which to some parents is like a red rag to a bull of permission giving for behaviour, because you're a high performance child now, so I get to treat you in X kind of Y, Z way because I'm now a high performance parent. Yeah, I mean, it is very sad, isn't it? I mean, I'm married to a teacher. I go into schools all the time. I have a lot of contact with my own children's teachers, and I have a lot of contact with teachers professionally. But not in a million years would that make me think that I am a teacher. And what I find fascinating about coaches is coaches have parental connections at different times, but that hasn't been their primary role. And when I talk to coaches, like, we know how to talk to parents. I'm like, well, that's fascinating, because I've spent 20 years learning. Either I'm just a really slow learner, or there's a misunderstanding. And again, I don't think we've fueled people well enough at the coaching level to realise that this partnership. And I think for me, it goes back to the start of my story. I think people still naively believe that given 10 athletes in front of them, that they are the most powerful and important person in that 10 athletes' life. And for the hour that they're coaching them, I think they probably are. But beyond that, it isn't guaranteed. And I love those stories where athletes go back and visit their first coach, and their first coach clearly had a massive and significant impact on their life. But so did that athlete's parents, and so did other people. And so for me, I just think if we want the best outcomes for kids, if we really want to put kids first, if we want to be child athlete centered then actually we'll be family centered. Because if we're not kind of resourcing the family, we're not going to be helping the athlete as much as we want to. And that doesn't mean that coaches then have to spend hours and hours a week doing family stuff. It means 5 minutes before the session, just saying to parents, this is what we've got going on. 5 minutes before a match, handing out challenge cards or games or whatever. 5 minutes afterwards, doing a team talk in front of parents. That email, sending an email out, or however it may be done once a week through encouragement. Arranging a few parent socials through the year. Making sure you have a very clearly defined set of parameters about what your club's around. I mean, the number of club information packs I see that are encyclopedic in length, and then a club will get in touch with me and they'll say, we've got a problem with this parent, what do we do? And it says on page 74, paragraph 3 that he shouldn't do that. And I'm like, okay, and does he know what page 74, paragraph 3 says? Oh, well, they all got sent a copy when they joined the club. And how long's this child been in the club? 5 years? Right, okay, can you tell me what the clause 3 up says on that? No, you can't. So I think for me, I like to try and encourage all institutions, right from Pathways down, to have a simple one-page parent information sheet that talks about coaching philosophy, selection philosophy, game time philosophy, safeguarding. Not enough elite performance centres are making it clear where the safeguarding channels are within there. I'm not saying they don't have them, because clearly they do, because they have to. But I went to Somerset County Cricket Club, and the guys there did a fantastic 15-minute presentation before I spoke on exactly this stuff, on their selection criteria, what they're looking for in athletes. They asked all the parents to take a photo of the image of the 2 safeguarding officers, made it very clear the safeguarding officers don't work for the club, so please feel free to get in touch. They would have emailed that out as well. They weren't just relying on that. And they did all that really succinctly in 15 minutes. I mean, Somerset would get my award under Snelly down there would get my award for just giving parents, others do it as well, but just giving parents concise, simple information that is a really easy reference point. Because then when you get into conflict with people later on, and conflict does come, because we're human beings, we have conflict. You and I would disagree over stuff. And, the question for me is, let's be honest about that, and let's just then tell parents, listen, we might fall out, and when we fall out, if we fall out, this is how we'd like you to think about handling it, which is we want you to come and talk to us. But, the whole 48-hour rest, don't email straight away. And we want to talk to you. And then I would say to coaches, do talk to those parents, but, if you know them really well, and it's a parent you know really well, and it's a one-off thing, meet with them on your own. But if it's not, and you meet with them with someone else, or have a phone call with another coach there on speakerphone, and let the parent know that, But just, I think if we could simplify the communication, simplify how we explain what we're doing, I think it will help get parents on board. We'll get all parents on board, but it'll help get parents on board. And then that information can be put everywhere. I crudely say if you can't pee in front of it, then it's too long. And if, in clubhouse toilets and things like that, the junior program could be put above the urinals on the back of the toilet doors, and that's their game time philosophy and things like that.
Love that. I mean, I've just been, as you've been saying that, I've literally just been writing various ideas in the last engagement there. There's just so many different things that you could put there, like the one-page information sheet. Am I right in thinking that you've got a template for that on the
yes,
site?
I have. Yes, I can. I'll email you the link and you can put that in the notes. But yes, certainly one-page information pack is certainly on my. And then the last thing I would do in every season is I would send the parents a questionnaire about how did you find the season, and I would ask parents questions about coaching. Because although parents aren't experts on coaching, they may have either seen stuff you haven't seen, or it will identify gaps in their knowledge. So if, say for you as a club, if you've had a target this year to work on as a club, it may be around kind of gameplay or what you're trying to achieve with the athletes, etc. And you ask parents what's been our coaching aim this year, and if they don't feed that back to you, then that gives you an insight into what's been missing. But actually, some parents do know a bit about the sport, and they might offer some really helpful. You don't have to follow what the parents say. But it gives you, for me, that gives you what you're going to talk about at your first parents' meeting at the start of the season, because it gives you a heads up of to how what touch points, what people have enjoyed. It'll also give you loads of encouragement and I've got a template for that on there as well. Because you should be asking, what's your child enjoyed about? Why do they come back? Please ask your child what they would say to their friends to try and invite them to come along. And that then gives you some marketing material as well to go and put out there if you want to. But you should be encouraged. You should hear the specifics. I think it's, my son's club, every year we give the coaches something at the awards night, and that's very, very important. I think we should be doing that. But a part of me sometimes wishes they would. I have offered them this template, but so, I'm working on those good coaches, and I think they would get a lot of encouragement by reading back what the parents say.
Brilliant. It's interesting to me. You right at the start, you were talking about how you get brought in by organisations, and increasingly you're getting brought in by organisations in the talent pathway. Mm-hmm. And I guess that stands to reason in some ways, because as children move further up the talent pathway, the demands on them increase in terms of the amount of commitment required towards their training or whatever it is in the sport. The distances usually increase because there's always a travel to a centre. I've tried to break that model several times in my career, trying to bring the coaching to the kids, but it's never quite worked. So we always, because we're not particularly inclusive in talent systems, it's always, you got to come to us, to our centres, because apparently facilities are everything. So again, then the transportation challenge becomes higher. So the dependency then on the parent is even higher. So if you think about it, it's quite symbiotic, really, because the organisation needs the parent to transport the child to the session. The child needs the parent to transport the child to the session. And all through that process, there's also this whole other area around the reinforcement of messaging, because in that talent space, one of the other challenges I think that we often face is that it's going to become quite challenging, because as children go through that talent journey, part of this is about getting them to understand that if they are thinking or considering a life within an elite sport context, that life is going to be atypical. It's going to require them to provide a level of commitment and dedication to their sport that few are able to do. And as a result, they need to start to begin to understand that level of dedication and commitment. And that will be difficult. For some, that will be a difficult thing for them to transition into. It'll be a difficult change of identity almost. There'll be some questions around, do I want this? There'll be some tears around, oh my God, that was difficult. There'll be all those challenges. And parents have got different approaches to how they respond to that. What the instinctive response is probably to say, oh God, they're terrible. How dare they? Oh God. And that's where I think a lot of the breakdown occurs. So I totally understand why the talent community are saying, oh, we really need you to come in because we've got these problems with parents and we need you to solve the problems. But it's telling, isn't it? That I wrote it down earlier that sometimes the academy staff, they don't want the CPD for themselves because they don't think it's their problem. So I'd love you to unpick some of those dynamics.
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, that is primarily my work environment. I think there's a lot of research, isn't there, around kind of what parents in sport kind of want, but I don't know if we've really drilled into some of the more nuanced parts of the talent world and the parent relationship. Is there such a thing as performance parenting? I know that what does that look like? There's some suggestions on Twitter that some research will be coming out shortly. For me, I recognise that when I stand in front of a group of parents, there's such a diverse set of motivations and set of expectations there. You can see the parent who's totally chilled out about this. Yeah, if my child plays for England, great. If they don't, we love them. It's great, whatever. You can see the parent who is ridiculously excited that my child is going to be an England player, is going to be a professional sports star. You can see the parent who's really bored. you can see the parent who is really, really passionate that this sporting journey doesn't interrupt their education. And other than maybe football, tennis, and golf in this country, if you make it to be a superstar at any of those, financially you probably are set for life. But I reckon in the other sports, there has to be a career post sport. And it's fascinating going into like England under 18 camps and pointing out to them that there are World Cup winners who are kind of heroes and people I think are amazing and who now have to have a job because winning the World Cup did not set them up for life. So I recognise all those tensions in that space. So for me, I for the parents in that space, I'd like them to just be reminded and to be encouraged to get back to the basics of parenting, which I think most parents want to get back to, because I genuinely think that, again, going back to the safe and uncertain model and other bits and pieces out there, that home needs to be a harbour. Home needs to be the place in the midst of all that kind of that home can be a place where you can be yourself, you're loved, and you know that your sporting value does not determine your value in the home environment. So I heard of a professional athlete a couple of weeks ago at 20 years old trying to choose the next part of their professional pathway. They were in a meeting with a mum and dad who were together, and basically mum and dad had a row in front of this child and in front of their next coaches about where the child should next go in this process. And that just breaks my heart, mate. That absolutely breaks it. How have we got to a system where parents think that is the next loving move? So for me, I recognise, and I suspect where some of that research might come out to, there probably are some unique traits to parenting an elite athlete, but I want to try and get back to the basics, which I actually think most parents want to get back to. I think, again, one of the comments I get quite often after that's really good common sense, I just wish I did it more. And trying to remind parents that this is their child and that they love them and that their sporting value doesn't define their love, and how to kind of keep drawing that out. That's why I've written my book, 40 Conversations for the Journey, because part of that is around character and mindset to support people in performance environments, or whether they're actually just in grassroots. I think it's just as useful for both. And I'd be fascinated to hear whether you think that's the right approach or not. But certainly I think having a normal human, and by that I don't mean that coaches aren't normal human beings, but the coaches in those pathways hold so much power that to have somebody who doesn't hold power stand up and say, listen, love your kids, this is how to do it, these are the challenges you're going to face, these are the challenges around self-organisation, decision-making, kind of mindset around failure and moving forward, focusing on whether you're results focused as a family or whether you're focused on developing mindset and character, and also just really kind of trying to love parents in that place, because it's really nerve-wracking for those parents, because they know that their child's dreams are hooked in that. I think it's very lazy to say parents are vicariously living their dreams through their children. I work on an estate where lots of parents have no ambition for their children, and that's frightening. Absolutely frightening. So I don't think there's a problem with having ambition. It's how that's expressed and how we help parents keep a healthy balance in that. So I start most of those parents' meetings by giving those parents a standing ovation and basically acknowledging that their child wouldn't have made it into that part of the pathway without their parents' support. and trying to then use ask some questions and facilitate some gameplay, which helps parents get back to just being mum or dad, or mum and stepdad, or stepmum, or grandma or granddad. Because I think grandparents and aunts and uncles are an area that I think is also not thought about often, but that's a very wide net to cast. I think for coaches in elite pathways, I think they have to, like I said earlier, I think they have to recognise the power dynamic. I think they have to recognise that they have that power over parents. Last week for England hockey put a great day on. They had myself, Dr. Suzanne Brown, and Debbie, who's a nutritionist, whose surname's gone out of my head, which is really admirable because she was absolutely superb. And each of us gave an hour kind of presentation to the parents, as well as an hour's presentation on the pathway. But this was a midweek, and they had 150 parents turn up midweek. Must have taken time off work to kind of come and to do that. So I think for me, there are some pathways that seem to be getting this more into a more healthy dynamic between parents and athletes. But I know other pathways where I've gone to do a talk and they've only given parents 4 days notice before I've turned up to do my talk. And loads of parents are still turned up. And I just, had I known that at the time, I would have said, listen, let's cancel it. Let's rearrange. That's not really fair to parents. For me, that's it's certainly a misuse of the power dynamic. Does that answer your question? I feel like there was other stuff in your question as well. I've forgotten as I've been talking.
No, I think it's like I said, I just wanted you to unpick it really and just talk about it. I mean, I think the point you made around the sort of the idea that there is a perfect parent or there is perfect parenting, and if only we could get parents to be perfect in terms of their parenting style, we'd be fine. And I think secretly, deep down, I think there might be some of those people who hire you in who kind of are secretly hoping for that, that you've got this secret sizzle sauce that's going to make these parents better.
I do try and make that point that this is A, it's not a one hit wonder, and B, your parents weren't perfect and you're okay, and my parents weren't perfect and I'm okay. And one of my favourite parenting speakers, a guy called Rob Parsons, he just says to parents, look, relax, your kids are going to need therapy because they were your kids anyway. So just, just pick what the therapy's for, live out the values that you really want to live for your kid, which obviously says slightly tongue-in-cheek. And I think the other thing, I think parenting is really hard. We live in a very results-focused world. We see in the political sphere at the moment, don't we? Nobody can kind of be having a half bad day. Nobody can kind of be like, yeah, do you know what? I may have made a mistake there. You just kind of have self-justification all the time for where we're at. And yet parenting, how do you know you're getting it right? I often joke around with parents saying, I think the only time we know we've been successful as parents is when they choose our nursing home. That is the only time they know they're going to get it right. And then they come into this really intense environment where the children want to do really well because, and who can blame them? They have dreams of playing for England, and that there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But those dreams may come to nothing, and those dreams may lead to bad experiences. Those dreams, one of the coaches that I have spoken to a number of times challenges me to point out to parents that not every coach that their child is under for the next 20, 30 years will want the best for their child. They will just see them as a commodity to get the best out of them in their performance environment, which is a bit harsh and a bit dark, but it's true. There are some coaches out there who will just see athletes as commodities to their own trophy cabinet, and how you help parents, which is why for me, when talking to people like Janet Hunter, Sarah Hunter, the England captain's mum, just listening to how, she just loves her daughter regardless of performance, listening to Sarah talk about how after World Cup losses, how her mum and dad were just really normal with her, but very supportive. Didn't talk about the rugby, but were there, offered wise counsel, offered support, offered encouragement, but didn't put that on. Were just present, so that when the pain had to be, because a sporting pathway that will include a significant amount of emotional pain. And for me, again, Conversations for the Journey is about increasing emotional literacy at home. So in our household, we try and do several things around the table. When I say this, I don't want people to think we do this every day. I wish we did, but we don't. So we try and do compliments. So we try and go around the table and have everybody compliment each other, which is, depending on the family mood and who's fallen out with who, depends on the depth and sincerity of the compliment. But we try to do that. What's fascinating is when we have like our grandparents round, they kind of struggle with that because that's outside of their normal kind of vocabulary. It's not that they don't love their grandchildren or whatever, but they struggle to work out how to look someone in the eye. So my wife and I, we run a group for boys who are 10, 11 years old, and involves lots of drumming and things like that. And we get these boys giving each other compliments. And to be honest with you, I thought they'd be like, oh, I like your football team. But they get really good really quickly at looking each other in the eye and saying, Stuart, I really appreciate the way you resource coaching in the UK by putting yourself out to run this podcast. Or, obviously, they're out to, but they're really honest. And so we do that around the table. We do highs and lows. So, like, what's been the best bit of your day? What's been the worst bit of your day? And then we don't try and fix it. I think so often we try and fix problems. And I'm all for growth mindset, but sometimes we just need to be able to say, oh, that was a bit rubbish, wasn't it? Without a 10-point plan to moving forward, because it sometimes just needs exercise and just that honesty. Obviously, I'm all for moving forward as well. And people can have one high and one low, two highs or two lows, and we just go, oh, mate, thanks for sharing. We really appreciate that.
Interesting you mentioned growth mindset, because it's a misconception around growth mindset that everything needs to be about the positive, whereas in reality, actually, Carol Dweck's mission when she was redoing the research about that was because she had concerns about the self-esteem movement, creating, this kind of false identity for children that, you can be anything, this can be wonderful, you can do this, and you are great, and and all these sorts of things, which she felt was potentially causing some long-term harm. And I think in some respects this is being borne out with some of the stuff we're seeing now at the moment with young people and depression and all the other things. You make the reference to growth mindset is, and what I love about what you've just talked about there is embracing struggle. So hardship. I mean, and you're talking about that, and that's valuable.
So the last one we do is we just go around the table and say, what have you not solved yet? So, and again, I think it's really important for Alice and I to be able to model that, to say, actually, Dad's got a presentation coming up and it's on a theme that I've not done before. And I can't quite work out my angle, how I'm going to communicate that in a way that enables my audience to really listen to it yet. Or I'm in some conflict. Dad's in some conflict right now with another organization or something, and I'm desperately wanting to treat them as human beings. I want them to treat me as human beings, but right now I'm really peed and I haven't worked out how I'm going to send that email yet. So we try and be really honest that we're not perfect and we haven't met that level of perfection. And I think the frightening thing about that, you can do anything, you can be anything, is the whole self-help world is still massively hooked into that. Kind of starting a business, you kind of meet other entrepreneurs, and there seems to be a significant number of self-help books that are basically promising people the world and just will not be able to deliver. When people say, oh, you can do anything, it's just your mind limiting you. I was like, no, it's not just my mind, it's my body, it's my age, but that doesn't mean I can't be great and successful. And there's a difference, isn't it? But we promise people the world and we don't deliver, really. And you're right. I mean, when I talk to parents, I talk about that kind of X factor moment where you see mum and dad in the kind of side with Ant and Dec or whatever, and mum and dad are saying, oh, they're amazing, they're the best singer, we hear them sing at home every day and we're so pleased that they've come out here, and they just spout all that flattery stuff. Oh yeah, Simon's going to offer them a platinum record deal or whatever, and then they go out and sound like a strangled cat. And it's that kind of flattery. And at home it's quite interesting because my eldest son is massively sporty, and our eldest daughter, she's not as into sport, but last year she decided she wanted to join the girls' football team, and we were like, great, yeah, that's cool. So we got a pair of football boots or whatever, and she came home heartbroken after one training session that she hadn't made the team. And it's quite a difficult conversation, so we let her be emotional about it, because I believe we need to let grief be expressed before we kind of bring in conversation. But, that's quite a difficult conversation to have with your daughter. How many practices have you been to, Jess? Just one. Okay. How many practices do you think the other girls have been to? Oh, they've been practicing for 2 or 3 years. So could you see the link between that and why they were selected? Yeah, but I really want to do it. Okay, well, that's good. But what trying to have an honest conversation with her, going, look, darling, I'm not surprised. In fact, I would have been a little bit shocked if you had been selected, or really ecstatic. You're obviously going to be an amazing footballer if you got picked after one session. And trying to have an honest conversation so that children can kind of evaluate where they're at, and then make a plan of kind of what I want to do, or do I have the courage and guts to kind of go for this and keep going.
They call it, and there's an instinctive emotional response to that as well, which is that, for example, that's an example where, you're right, absolutely right to do what you like. But you do have situations, don't you, where you've got kids who, for no fault of their own, apart from maybe, there's the situation that they haven't been selected, right?
Yeah.
And they're heartbroken. This can happen in the talent space, can't they?
Oh,
They put their
definitely.
heart and soul into it and they haven't made it. And there's in the talent space, one thing, in a club context, in a participation context as well, there is a tendency there for the parent, this bulldozer parenting, to sort of, want to get the obstacle out of the way. But to borrow a phrase from Ryan Holiday's great book, the obstacle is the way.
Yeah.
And so actually what we're better off doing is to help the kids with understanding how they're feeling, understanding what it is they might need to do about it, what it is that they could do about it, what are the things they can be in control of, what are the conversations they could have that are going to help them to achieve what it is they want to achieve.
Totally. And I would add to that, they're not defined by what they do with that.
No, exactly.
That boulder either. For my daughter, Dana, you're no less lovely because you didn't make that, even though you wanted to. But let's talk about it. No, I mean, you and I both share having a child with dyslexia, and that's part of me wonders how helpful it was giving my child that label at times. Because it could be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, I can't do this because I'm, and it's like that's not actually true. You can't do it like that because you are. And as someone who is also very dyslexic, if you've ever got an email off me or seen a blog post that I haven't sent off to be proofread, you'll find those quickly on my website. I know that I've spent kind of 20 years developing a bunch of coping strategies and learning to enjoy the parts that dyslexia gives me uniquely. And I think if you came to one of my presentations, you'd see that kind of creative way of engaging in problem solving. Particularly, I suppose one of my gifts is how to communicate something. But trying to say to my son, try not to quickly give my son 20 years of learning, or longer than that, 30 years of learning how to handle being dyslexic in one dad speech because he's heartbroken because he hasn't got the test score that he wants. And actually trying to say, no, listen, I found my way around this boulder, or on top of it, or actually just quite happy to lean against it here or there. He's got to find his own way around his boulder, and I think that's partly where a lot of parents who have had a sporting journey perhaps struggle, because they know how they coped with it or didn't cope with it, and then try to superimpose that, well-meaning, again, not because they want their child to, but they're like, oh, I dealt with not being selected like this, or this is what you need to do, instead of kind of letting their child explore and express how might they resolve this challenge. Sorry.
Well, it's funny you talk about the labeling thing. I've reflected on that myself around the value of it. I think on balance, I think the understanding and the diagnosis was definitely a positive thing, because what it did was it meant, there's a boulder. Before that point, we didn't even know if there was a boulder.
No.
And then when you've got a boulder, you can at least find a way of whether you're going to go over, round, through, whatever it might be. And I think for Evan, it helped as well, because it certainly helped our engagement with him, because it meant that we could engage with him on a different level of empathy. And we now know the difference between, we used to think perhaps he just didn't pay enough attention, or he wasn't focused, or it wasn't this, that, or the other. And then particularly, my wife, who would often be doing the homework because I was coming back from work late or whatever it might be, there'd be source of frustration, which then becomes self-fulfilling, because it's like he just doesn't want to go anywhere near it. And I'm keep trying to say, well, I'm not sure this is the right way. Once we got that clarity, we were able to say, right, now we have a different understanding of what it is. And now we know the difference of, because don't get me wrong, he can definitely not be focused. He can definitely not give his attention and this, that, and the other. But in fairness to him, for him, I think it gave him a little source of comfort that he now knew what it was. It wasn't just that, he wasn't as good as, because everything's about peer comparison in school, and it's so challenging and difficult. So he knew that he doesn't read as well and all that sort of stuff. So he now knows something. And in fairness, he's really diligent with it. So he has tutoring and all that sort of stuff, and he gets extra support and all those sorts of things. Yeah. And a lot of kids would hate it, but you never hear him complain, because he recognizes that this is his boulder, and this is a boulder he's got to overcome. And so in many ways, that's been a really positive thing for us. But like you say, I do reflect on that sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, but I sometimes cheekily wondered whether we could have got the diagnosis and not told him, which is awful. I realise that's awful, but I'm a non-perfect dad. But it's trying to, and you're right. And Caleb's a few years older than Evan, so it's that real challenge of what that means at secondary school for him, and how he interprets where he's at compared to others, and that he's doing that in lots of ways, not just around his school. I mean, that's part of being a teenager. That's part of the teenage brain's development, and trying to offer him a harbour at home where he knows that this boulder doesn't define him, but we're totally with him if he wants to try different techniques. And bless him, yeah. I mean, Caleb does get frustrated about some stuff, but he does engage. And the school have done a really good thing. They're quite wise. They've offered him a sixth form mentor, which again is something I don't see happen in Pathways a lot, is kind of giving an older mentor. So, if Caleb was given tutoring, I'm not sure how he would feel about tutoring at the moment, but he was given a cool sixth former who helps him with his maths and English. And, and all his mates are like, oh, how come you get to hang out with them? The school have been really switched on around that. And for me, kind of linking into that mentoring stuff, kind of in some ways quite a segue, but part of me wonders around how we support parents. It tends to stop at 18 as well. So how do we support parents through the 20s and the senior athletes as well? Because those boulders don't go anywhere, and those children still come home. So my son will come home when he's 20, whether he's ends up being a performance athlete or a doctor or whatever it is he ends up doing. He will come home with that boulder of dyslexia, and sometimes probably have a bit of a about it, and we want to talk to him about it. And I've yet to find a pathway. I've been in talks with one national governing body that continue the parenting support through under 20, particularly under 20s. I mean, if you think about under 20 athletes, 2 years before they were under the parents' responsibility, they were living at home. Now, 2 years later, they're living either away in a sporting environment or they're away at uni and doing sport. So they've got no time for parental kind of, they probably get home for very little time at Christmas. They're trying to either do studies alongside their performance athlete career as well. And how do we support parents understand that adjustment and cope well with that adjustment? And particularly then when that child rings up and says, although I think this should happen earlier, this is my boulder at the moment, to stop mum and dad flying into bulldozer mode and to learn how to ask, again, a good bunch of questions around helping that child realise what their options are, that sometimes there's not a good option. I think we live in too much of a fairy tale ending. We're going to find 10 options and there's going to be one that stands out as the gold star. Actually, do you know what? We've got 10 options and all of them are a bit khaki. So what we'll do...
The least worst one.
The least worst one, yeah. What is the least worst one? And sometimes it is that. What is the least worst option for the next 6 months for your life? Or what is the least worst option for long term? And by the time athletes get to kind of 20s, 30s, they're out of that teenage phase of not being able to think past the end of their nose, which is why so many, no smoking campaigns fail, because teenagers' brains can't think till they're 80. But when they start to kind of get... come out of that top and they're starting to be able to think about that, so that children can start to think about long term. Doesn't stop me saying to my kids, well, what's the long term benefit of that decision? What's the short term benefit of that decision? Because often in life, short term benefit is to long term pain, and long term benefit is to short term pain. I mean, that isn't a universal rule, but it's a fairly accurate assessment of kind of decision making, isn't it? And how do we help parents kind of fuel those conversations? Because they're going to get them, and they're going to get them even more emotively, because they're going to feel out of control. And kind of empty nesting, when you read around the emotional material of that time, apparently is very, very painful.
So you mentioned earlier, I nearly glossed over it, but you mentioned the book earlier, and I'd be remiss of not talking about the book. I mean, you've written a book and you call it Conversations for the Journey, 40 ways for you to build sporting character.
Yep.
And I'd be interested to understand the genesis of the book as a starting point. But before we do all that, I mean, I do think it's also interesting that being a dyslexic as you are, you chose to go down this path as your first foray into the provision of materials. So clearly you follow. This was obviously your boulder, and you clearly
do you know what it was really? It's funny because when I wrote to people asking for endorsements, I wrote, "Oh, this dyslexic's written a book," and I reflected on that afterwards, thinking, "Why did I write that? That's quite interesting, isn't it?" We won't psychoanalyze me now. I'll wait for therapy for that. So I did certain things about being dyslexic. Firstly, I married an English teacher. That seemed to me. I mean, it's not for a great looks or personality or anything like that. It's just purely because she's good with a red pen. So
skills,
that, exactly. So that for me, I wanted to write something that would follow up from my talks, because I was conscious of a one-off and I was conscious of institutions using me in a kind of one-off way. So I wanted to be able to, I want to resource parents. I have a lot of fun with parents. I enjoy doing the parents meetings, but the parents meeting in and of itself is not enough. I wanted to do something that stretched out beyond that. I wanted to do something that wasn't a manual. I desperately felt like telling parents what to do and not to do is not helpful. And so what the idea behind it is, it's 40 conversation ideas basically, and in that conversation idea it says what to try and avoid, because every question has pitfalls as well as benefits, and hopefully what the question will give. But hopefully it comes across as different ways to try and ask it, because I recognize that my context is completely different to lots of other people's context. Your context at the moment, some of these questions might ask just as written. So I wanted to try and give some scaffolding for around how conversations could happen. And I was also really conscious that as someone who's pretty creative and has spent a long time working with parents, it's easy for me to say, oh, don't ask these 3 questions because they're really bad. But then what do you fill that space with? So I wanted to give parents something really practical that they could fill that space with. And it's funny, my wife asked my son one of these questions when he was in the car recently on the way to rugby, and he turned to her and said, "Is that what people are paying for?" But then they had a 15-minute conversation talking about stuff they'd never, ever talked about. And there's some really interesting research coming out at the moment, particularly that young male athletes will only, well, not will only, but their order of preference to talk to is dad, coach, school teacher, and then mum comes a very long, far off fourth. So particularly for mums, yeah, it's quite fascinating. And part of that, I think, is the teenage male kind of growing up thing, preparing to move away from the nest. Who wrote Raising Boys and Raising Girls? The name's gone completely out of my head. Very famous parenting guy, but he talks about that in his book. And I think, so I wanted to be able to resource parents to do that, but I didn't want to be like this is what you have to do step by step. I wanted to try and hold that tension a little bit. And yeah, part of me did want to, Miss Faulkner, when she predicted me an F in English, did want to stick 2 fingers up at her and say, look, I've written a book, if I was being honest. I don't know if that's the best motivation, but part of me did want to do that. My best friend publishes books for a company, so it's self-published, so bless him, he was very, very helpful in kind of helping channel that. He's a very clever guy. We're chalk and cheese, which is what makes our friendship work really, really well. So that kind of assisted. But what has blown me away is how many coaches have said to me, "Oh, I'm going to use these questions in a coaching session." Now that wasn't in my head when I was writing it, but I've been really encouraged that seems to be a helpful resource. And I think I've tried to write it for parents to understand what it will give their children. Because again, I have a hunch, and I'm going to keep exploring that hunch, that parents don't really buy resources that are purely for parenting. I think they buy resources that give a positive outcome for their children, and they need to see that straight away. So I could have called this Parent Conversations, but I think parents are not looking for that type of resource. I think parents are looking for a resource that give their children a win. And so I wanted to try and fill that space that I think at the moment isn't there. Really, I hope to follow. Sorry.
One of the things that I really like actually is the practicality. It really resonates from a practicality. I mean, and also, it's clearly been, it's been written for somebody who, finds reading challenging, because what you've done is you've deliberately kept it really quite to the point and punchy. So you haven't been overly wordy. If I'd have written this, it'd have been pages and pages and pages, because obviously I like to, ramble on about stuff, as anyone listening to the podcast does. But what I love about it is they've all got really, really nice, neat titles that are memorable. Like one of my favorites is what is it? Mum and Dad DJ in the house. Is that what it is?
Yeah, that is one. Yeah, that is one.
That's a good one. And warning: mega awkward conversation with your parents. So they all stick in your mind. What would your top trumps card say? I mean, I love all these, but one thing I was going to say is what I like is they're very practical. So you mentioned something earlier about like the dinner table conversation. So we've all been there, and I have it all the time. My daughter comes home, 7 years old. How was school today? Good. That's it. It's basically like, right, we'll just stop that conversation there, Dad, because I've got much more interesting things to do over here with the craft paper and all those sorts of things. So actually, that's the wrong. What I recognised is that's I'm asking the wrong question. And it's very simple, isn't it? A very simple thing. Like you said something earlier on about so what haven't you solved? What didn't you solve today? Or what was it? What challenges did you face today? Or even the conversation, how was school today? The answer is good. The answer, so instead of saying that, just have a conversation of what happened at school today, or whatever it is. I mean, she's just become librarian. I'm not quite sure what that means. Apparently, it's a big deal.
I was going to say, it sounds a very powerful role.
She's very proud of herself.
Shush people.
She told me a joke. Funny enough, she told me a joke this morning. She said a librarian joke, and she said, "What was it?" She goes, "Yeah." We walked up to somebody and said, "Oh, can you tell me the way to school?" And they said, "I don't know. I'm a librarian." He said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Can you tell me the way to school?"
That's terrible and brilliant, all at the same time.
7-year-old joke. I thought that was pretty clever.
That is pretty good. Yeah. That is
anyway, so it's important. I'll have to ask her when she comes back. Tell me all about being a librarian. What did it involve? All those sorts of things. It's a much more in-depth conversation than purely the how was, that kind of thing.
I think if I had a workshop with 20 parents for a day, that we would have come up with another 100 questions that some of them would have been here. I think the information is in us anyway, but we live in a very distracting orientated world, don't we? And so I wanted to be able to provide something that could sit in the car glove compartment if you do regularly drive and you're just about to pick them up and you can quickly have a flick through, or a resource for coaches, to be honest, to give out to their parents or to sell to their parents or whatever, just so that coaches can be just nudging parents away from the three ugly sisters of did you win, did you score, were you player of the match after sport. But also, in some ways, none of them are really about coaching. None of them are about coaching. So trying to shift parents away from coaching conversations to person conversations as well. I'm delighted with it. I'm thinking of what number 2 will look like. We'll see.
One of the things I like is the way many of the questions reframe the locus of control away from the parent to the transmission of information from parent to athlete. But it's the other way around. So there's one, looking at contrite parents. I'm sorry. But the one I really like is how will mum and dad be scored? And talk me through that one, because I just love this idea.
Well, so there's a couple of bits behind this. Firstly, I think to support parental behaviour change and encouragement, I think the voice of their child is incredibly powerful. So there's loads of really good, like you talked about the fun map recently. What's the scientist who's done that?
Amanda Visek.
Amanda Visek, thank you. So Amanda Visek,
very shortly. I'm talking to her very shortly.
Brilliant, I look forward to that. So brilliant piece of research around what children do as fun. But when I can get, I use Mentimeter to go ask the athletes, why do you play this sport? And then the words go up on the screen. And I love being able to say to parents, your kid put 2 of those words up. Which 2 words do you think your child put up? And so parents are immediately got a conversation on the way home. Oh, you did that. What did you do? And I know that the child's response is more powerful than that piece of research. Although that research is very good, very thorough. If you say this doctor person thinks this about why children play sport, but if you can get the child to express why that individual, your actual offspring, to explain why you play sport, I think that's far more likely to have a genuine impact. And I think the sideline behaviour stuff is not going to be solved by grumpy coaches on Twitter or big signs saying respect everybody here. It's going to be shaped by children saying, how will I be schooled today? What will be the key areas of dad's, and actually listening to my children, because my kids are at different age. One of them wants me to shout lots of encouragement. One of them wants me to almost disappear, and trying to recognize that there's a developmental question behind that as well. Children will want different things at different ages in different phases as well. And I'm convinced that voice is incredibly powerful. But again, if kids are going to play sport for a long period of time, they've got to enjoy it. And so how their mum and dad behave is a key factor into that enjoyment. And so if we can give kids that voice as to how are they going to be scored. My son's got a friend coming around tonight. We're off to see England women play Australia at Allianz Park tonight. That's the reason I'm wearing my England top today. And he just gave me a list of things we're not allowed to talk about when his friend was here. which was absolutely brilliant. He left some really embarrassing things off the list, so I might just text him later, because I know he's going to his friend's house first and they come back here. You didn't say I can't talk about this, or this.
This is the problem, isn't it? When you give a list, you've got to be pretty thorough.
I know my children's voices are very powerful in my own life. I recognise that they're very powerful in the life of parents as well. It's why I encourage school teams to make videos of their children talking about why they enjoy athletes, what they've got out of the season, what they've got out of the session, because mum and dad will share that massively on their social media networks. And I reckon just encouraging that conversation between parent and child that says, I'm not expecting to be perfect today. Help me, help shape our family life together. I also am I think it also offers a conversation because, I'm a dad of teenage children, which means I will embarrass them at times. I can't not do that because that's just the relationship is always going to be embarrassing. So I need to work out where it is okay by my value system to embarrass them and where it isn't. And screaming at the top of my lungs, oh yeah, go Jesse, Jesse's brilliant. That's embarrassing, but I will be there. I'm not going to not be there. I'm not going to turn up to listen. So I think if we can, I'm just a massive believer, if we can encourage conversation, then, and that means, if you came to the Shorter household, our dinner table is noisy and everybody's got an opinion and everyone's trying to put it across. But I'd much rather that than we sat there twiddling our thumbs, not sure about what to talk about, and allowing those kind of conversations to shape family life.
It's fascinating because one of the reasons I think that question resonates with me so much is because, again, as the parent coach, I was having a conversation with Evan on the way back from our coaching session the other day, and I don't know what was going on. He didn't have the best day. He wasn't in particularly focused, and wasn't working that hard. Wasn't trying as hard as he probably could have done. And we had to have a little quiet word with him because one of the things I talked to him about is the only thing I really care about, or the only thing I think I have a hard time with him is if he doesn't try his best, and if he doesn't try his hardest, then he doesn't do his best. So they're the only two things, to be honest. Results are not relevant, outcomes aren't relevant, grades aren't relevant, as long as he tries his hardest, does his best. And generally speaking, he does. So when we were having that conversation, I said, what on the way back, I said, tell me all about today. He said, you weren't your normal self today, and all that sort of stuff. He said, yeah, I don't know. I said, what do you think your score out of 10 would have been? He goes, 4. I was like, maybe a 4. And then the following week I said, what's your score out of 10 this week? And he went, 8. He said 8.5. I went, yeah, probably 8.5. You were about there, weren't you? You're much better. Yeah. Why were you? And we had that conversation. But what I've thought about just subsequently, having read the book this week, preparing for this interview, because every now and again I do some preparation, or this conversation, actually, it's not an interview. I then thought, why don't I ever flip the tables? So why don't I ask the kids, and why don't I ask him, how was I tonight? What do you think of me tonight? And he might say to me one day, 6, you're a bit grumpy, or, whatever. And I've never done it. And actually, it's something that I am going to take away as an action point.
Cool.
Well, how did you score me today?
And there's another question there for parent coaches. And I don't coach any of my children at the moment, but I lead our church youth group in there. And I make it quite clear. Sometimes it's our house, sometimes it's out. Right, Dad's taking my youth leader, Dad is taking his dad hat off, and I'm putting my church leader hat on now. And then I try and not be a dad, because there are some things my kids do that I might want to challenge if I was dad. But as a youth leader, I've let those things, wear whatever, and then when I get back in the car, I'm like, right, I'm taking the youth leader hat off and putting dad hat back on. How was the youth leader tonight? And just straight away trying to say, I want to hear your views. How was church youth group tonight? How can we make it better? What did you think of dad? Before, rather than me going, oh, you were disrespectful, or just normal kid behaviour. So trying to set that context of, I want to hear your point of view, and I want you to help me shape my experience as a human, as well as me shaping your experience as a human.
Which is important, isn't it? It's a dialogue, isn't it? It's not a one-way street. So it's not me about putting my value set as to where I think he's scored. He's actually got to be able to play that one back to me, because I actually need, and actually it's not just him, it's the other kids too. I've got to open up that dialogue with them to turn around and actually, almost on that live basis, let's talk about that. Interestingly, I do something very similar with the group. I said to them, what would make a great session? And they, what would make a great session from your perspective? Framing what a great session would look like. And they come up with, and they said, this particular group I work with at the moment was their 3 things were listening, focus, and purpose. So every now and again, when that's disappeared, I'll often say, right, where are we on that? And they give themselves a score out of 10.
Brilliant.
I ought to play that one back, right? my task to make a great session for you, is to be, well, I don't know, whatever it might be. I'll create the categories, and I'll ask, and they should be able to play it back to me and ask me, "Hey, coach, where are you today on the fun, enjoyment, engagement session?"
I think that's really important. I think that's important at any level, but I think particularly pathway to recognise the power dynamic that we have and to use it really, really well. In engaging with teachers and going into different classrooms to do bits and pieces, you can see teachers who teach by a kind of quite authoritarian style, and I often just wonder, what if the kids are allowed to give some feedback of this? I'm bored and I've a visitor, I've only been in here 10 minutes. What would happen if we not to give the kids voice because we want the kids to rule the world. Russell Earnshaw wants the kids to rule the world, doesn't he? But because I want there to be kind of a bit of a balance in that. But actually to allow us to get honest feedback, because kids are ridiculously honest, aren't they? But one of the other reasons I want to try and encourage that is sometimes my kids have teachers who almost represent that they're not allowed to have a view, they're not allowed to have an opinion. Yeah. And I think that's really, really dangerous. That's how the kind of bullying and abuse stuff kind of takes place within the sports world and in other places. If we teach children that they're not allowed a voice in this context, adults should be asking children, "How was that for you?" And I want to have an honest, even if that answer makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, I want to hear how that is. One of our local schools has been a bit of controversy over SATs results and things like that, and I said, "I hope you're talking to the kids about what happened." "Oh, no, because the kids won't understand." It's like, well, it was their experience. Surely they should be included, and I don't think kids would lie about that sort of thing. And to be honest with you, Stuart, maybe this would be a good way to wrap up. I don't know, but as a church minister, you have this incredible privilege of doing people's funerals. It's an incredible privilege to be invited into a family's life at that very, very painful point in time. But one of the things that really motivates me as a dad is I go into some family situations that sometimes it's one relative, sometimes it's lots of relatives, but they just really don't have anything to say about the person who's deceased. And sometimes you go into a situation like that, and it might be they just have one family member who's met with you to plan the funeral, or there's a whole cacophony of family members there, and you just can't stop them talking and sharing stories and things like that. I suppose my overall why is that is helping families connect at that kind of deeper level, to be able to share one another, hear one another, enjoy that kind of human experience with one another, recognize how, particularly for us adults, how our character rubs off on our children, both positively and negatively, and how that can be very detrimental or not. And I find it heartbreaking doing a funeral where the family don't offer anything, and I recognize that could be for a number of different reasons. But I also find it so warming when I meet, maybe it's just a widow or a widower or a large family, and they've clearly been impacted by the joy of knowing the other person, even if the other person had what the outside world might call a mundane manual job, never travelled overseas, particularly kind of in this part of East London. Some people have led fairly people might call ordinary lives, and I just think often we talk about legacy, and I think it's kind of a slightly skewed conversation, because the reality is for most of us we will stop work 20, 30 years before we pass away. And so our legacy is really how we impacted those closest to us, how our character rubbed off on those closest to us. And I get really excited about hearing stories from coaches in 20, 30 years' times, which will be, "Oh, Rich, you came and did parent sessions for us, and I met the parents of X who was in our national under-21 side, and their parents came up to us and said, 'You don't remember, we came to your parents' meetings. Your parents' meetings not only helped us with an elite athlete, but they helped us just really build a great relationship with our kids, such a great relationship that we're using the same tactics now on our grandchildren, and they're helping us build really close relationships on our grandchildren.' And for me, I think there are some parenting resources out there that might help people be a better parent to an elite performer, but I want to help parents be better parents to their children, and so that these types of conversations, whether they be out of the book or anything else that we've resourced, enable athletes and then also just normal human beings to keep going and to build, to get closer to one another. I think they do love each other, but to kind of foster and nurture that love. And I think that's my legacy. Someone recently asked me, what does my biggest legacy be? I want the best parts of my character to be overflowing in my children.
I mean, and I think that most of us would buy into that idea. I mean, and just talking about the point about elite, there are so many examples of elite performers who have broken relationships with their parents because the parent drive that got that individual to the elite performance, that's actually also what causes the breakdown in their relationship. So for me, as you know, I'm always looking for, what's the best of both worlds here? What's the best way we can encourage young people to experience sport in a great way, but also help them develop? Likewise, in a parental context, I'm constantly in this dynamic tension of trying to say to my children, I want you to love sport, enjoy sport, play lots of different sports, have a great time with sport, learn and develop through sport. If then at some point you decide that then, you want to go on to elite pathway, that's entirely up to you, and I'll be there to support you. But I'm always worried that maybe I'm not doing enough. Am I doing enough nudging, enough pushing? Am I doing enough of those things? And I'm always fine, and I know pretty much whatever happens, it's going to be like I either didn't push enough or I pushed too much. You can't find the balance.
But are you in? Let's be generous to you. In 60 years' time, going to be on your deathbed going, "Oh, I wish my kids had played elite sport."
No.
I mean, that is never going to be? Well, I say never because for some people it may be. But and it's interesting, isn't it? Because you talk about pushing. So, like in our house, we have a very low tolerance for excuse making. I have a very low tolerance for that. It's the thing that probably gets me crossest. Either he made me do it or she made me do it when talking about their siblings, or I couldn't do that today because the coach was rubbish or the teacher was rubbish or it's the teacher's fault. No, sorry, I'm not. Where there may be a relational cause to that kind of thing, but actually, no, you take ownership. So we're a big believer, and it's our value system recognise it. In push yourself, give yourself a shot. My son's in a pathway now. And so my only question is just how do you want to be remembered in this bit, mate? I want to be doing it. Right, great, go for it. What are you going to do? What are you going to do for that? And does it matter if you make it far or not? No, I know it doesn't matter. No, you're right, it doesn't matter. But as long as you do, like you were saying, as long as you push yourself to kind of take on the challenge, then I don't care how far you do or don't make it. Really.
You brought up funerals earlier on, and I don't know whether it's the minister in you, but you seem to have a spooky way of resonating with things that are happening in my life. So yesterday I attended the funeral of a fantastic gentleman by the name of Rod Fox, and actually I would be I'd be horribly remiss not to actually utilize this opportunity to pay tribute to him. There must have been 200 people in the church. And he was, I had the fortune of getting to know him because he was the father, actually, of one of the players who played. So I was coaching a men's team, National League team, this was a number of years ago. And he was one of the fathers, and he became the manager. I needed some help, and I realised I couldn't do this all. And he was prepared to be the manager. And he'd coached Midland sides, and he'd coached and managed Midland sides, and all these sorts of things. And he came along, and he was there being my manager. And he never once ever played the game of, well, when I was the Midlands manager, I did this or that. He was there to support me. He had the ability to, when he could feel. Because when I was a bit younger, I was a little bit less measured and I was a bit more hot-headed. And when he could almost sense when my boiling point was coming up and I was likely to explode, and I'd feel a hand come on my shoulder, and he'd be like, "Look, don't worry, he'll be all right." And then the next thing, he'll be going, "What?" And he'd be the one doing all the shouting on the sideline. He was absolute classic gentleman. And the tributes that were paid to him yesterday in the service, it was a fantastic service. And his son, who's a great guy, a long-time friend of mine. I coached him, but I'm pleased to call him my friend. And the tributes that he paid, that were paid to him by people in the hockey world. There was a good friend of mine did a eulogy talking about the stuff he's done as a coach and as a manager and the impact he's had on other people. And I genuinely sat there and listening to this, thinking to myself, do you know what? If people said half that about me, when my time comes, I would be absolutely delighted about that. And what a tremendous. And
it's fascinating, isn't it?
His connection with his son was the big thing for me that came through, and his whole family, the connection he had, his two daughters, his son, all those sorts of things. And they actually talked about, and this was the one thing. Sorry, I just wanted to resonate with this one. Yeah. They talked about how they were genuine equals and genuine friends, and Rod would go and speak to Dan and ask Dan's opinion about certain things that needed to happen. Brilliant. So it wasn't the dynamic of the all-seeing father and all that sort of stuff. It was a totally different. And that, for me, I left there thinking, wow, that's something very, very powerful.
It is, and for me, those are character words, aren't they? That's why I bang on about character, because I think that's what resonates with us from a place of knowing that we're loved, that we're able to develop those characters. And sometimes that character development is risky, and sometimes it upsets people because it good character is sometimes, like we were saying earlier, countercultural in certain contexts. But yeah, that's my hope. I hope to impact as many parents' lives in the sports world at the moment, and where I work on Harold Hill as much as possible. But I am focused on trying to be consistent with who I talk about at home, and I'm not perfect. And I have no expectation of being perfect. But I hope that the character traits that I think about me are brilliant. My kids will pick up or emulate, trying to embody those within themselves. And like you say, that willingness to listen, willingness to say sorry, and move forward, willingness to encourage on an awkward path. Those sorts of things I think are immensely important in an elite sport context and in any parental-child relationship, really.
Well, Richard, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, same. Thank you.
And I think there's so much here that, like I said, we probably could have had several conversations over and above. I'm really pleased that you decided to overcome or go round your boulder, which was to write the book.
Thank you.
Glad to hear that there's another one coming out. You said it here first, so we'll be listening for that one.
Yeah.
And you've made a commitment, so there you go. I'm going to help you.
Yeah, it's starting. It's been started.
Help you with accountability.
So if people go to www.non-perfectdad.co.uk/talent equation, there's a special Talent Equation listeners deal there that they can listen to, but also that obviously is my website, so go and have a snoop around. They can find the other bits of that we've talked about here today on there as well.
That sounds like a win-win proposition. I can highly recommend it. And on this podcast, I don't recommend stuff that I don't believe in. And I wouldn't be saying that about something that I didn't genuinely feel had value. And it's already had value for me on several occasions. And like I said, there's that element of this journey that we're all on together. It's never going to be easy. There's going to be plenty. They talk about it being a rocky road. There are boulders, there are challenges. And this is, you said it's not a manual, but if there ever is a manual that's going to help on that journey, then this is it.
Brilliant. Thanks, buddy. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolute pleasure, and all the best.
Thanks for listening to the Talent Equation podcast. If you like the show, then please consider supporting it by leaving a review on your favorite podcast player, telling your friends about it, or even becoming a hero and show your appreciation by becoming a patron. Just head over to thetalentequation.co.uk and click on the Becoming a Patron button at the top of the page.
And there you have it. Wow, that felt like a whirlwind of a conversation. We just covered so much ground. It was a proper tornado of dialogue. The passion and energy that Richard puts into what he does comes through loud and clear. It doesn't need me to say much more about it. But really enjoyed that, and loved just hearing some of the ideas. I had loads of things I took away from that. One of the things that really resonated was just understanding that, some of the responses from parents, it's coming from love, it's coming from their desire to protect and to help their young, their children succeed. The other thing about, the lack of training and education that coaches are receiving in how to engage with parents. I think for me, one of the things I've taken away here is that I had the opportunity for that conversation. Hopefully you've got some value, but I do think doing some more work with people such as Richard who work in the parent space, it is of real value. This other aspect as well of, home needs to be a harbour. That can be a place where we can switch off from all that chaos and craziness. And also the element of who within the hierarchy of the talent pathway think they need this information. They think it needs to be transmitted down to parents. It's not about them at all. And I think there's an important piece of reflection there around our responsibility to engage. Lots and lots I took away. Hope you valued that. The book, like I said before, absolutely fantastic. Got loads in there for everybody to take away. Hope some of that's going to be useful for you. Hope you're going to be able to use it in the next few weeks, and it's going to assist you with your coaching on an ongoing basis. As always, you know where I am. If you want to get involved, you want to start being part of the learning journey within the conclave, lots of opportunities within there. There's a few spots available if people want to join in. Just go to the website and you can see how you can join in on the Patreon button. In the meantime, have a great week of coaching. I'll see you next week, and remember, ditch those drills.